Hey Pottery People, welcome back to our studio. We're gonna do a video today that we talked about in one of our previous videos, which is wedging, but we're also gonna add a little bit of information about clay prep in general. So there's a few things you wanna do with your clay before you start to work with it, aside from just wedging, but they're really easy little things that you can totally handle. So the first thing that you want is an absorbent surface. So I use plywood. You could also use a particle board wrapped really good in canvas. You could use a piece of drywall, or you could use like a plaster slab. So you have a lot of choices, but you want something that's gonna pull just a little bit of moisture from your clay so that it's not sticking when you're wedging on the surface, okay? And so, for example, if you were wedging on glass, you're putting a lot of pressure when you're wedging, so you need it to be able to release, okay? So that's a really important part before you start wedging. The second thing that's gonna come in really handy for you with clay prep is a scale. And this is just an old postage scale that was handed down to me by someone that wasn't going to use it anymore. And you'll see some really expensive scales out there. So if you can find one that someone's getting rid of, or find one maybe at a thrift store, they'll work just as well, okay? And this is just going to help you get consistency between each piece of clay that you're using. So particularly for those of you who maybe just are starting out on the wheel, you want to know that each piece of clay that you're working with is a pound, maybe a pound and a quarter, because having those consistent weights is going to give you the best chance of expediting your learning curve, okay? If you're using a different weight every time, it throws you off and you're kind of relearning with a different weight each and every time you sit down to throw. So in my years of teaching adult students, sometimes people have been really resistant to weighing, but it's really quick to do, and you don't have to get exact down to the ounce. But again, just getting that consistency is going to be really helpful for you if you're beginning. So I'm going to go ahead and start demoing for you 3 different types of wedging. The first one I'm going to show you is the easiest one, and then we'll move to a little more challenging and then kind of like the technique that experts use. But you can do it too, don't worry. It's not so hard that you won't be able to do it. So the first one really is kind of a cheat, and I'll show you how to do it now. So this is a technique that I have used with like older students or students who might have joint issues in their hands or wrists, and really just traditional techniques of throwing are not going to be practical for them. Also, sometimes, you know, if you just want to get a piece of clay that you can use quickly, you can use this technique. You will get some scraps from it, but save those, put them aside. You know, you can always do something with them. You can make little jewelry pieces or save them for handles or other little additive pieces, okay? So y'all don't judge me for this. So I'm gonna measure this to about a pound, maybe a little more because I am gonna trim some off. And I just tear it when I get a little extra and I need less. I just kind of rip it. Okay, that's about a pound and a quarter. So now all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut off what I call the crust. So those are the dry outer layers of the clay, the ones that you really are trying to mix in when you're wedging. So I can just kind of cheat and get rid of those. And then I'm gonna have a decently usable piece that I can now just pat into a ball. Now, this is gonna only work if you have a fresh block of commercial clay. Obviously, if you're using scraps, this doesn't work. But it kind of gets at the idea of having a wedged piece of clay, because all the inner layers of the clay should be pretty well mixed and pretty evenly hydrated. So I wouldn't say it's as good as traditional wedging techniques, but it's certainly something you can make work if you have those needs that we discussed just a second ago. So that's the first one. For our second technique, I'm going to show you a process that I call ram's horn, but you also might hear it called other names like dog ear or ox head, because of the shape that it takes when you start to wedge it. It's actually really kind of cute. So with this technique, it's a little bit easier than the third one that I'm going to show you, because your hands are going to work in tandem. They're going to be mirroring each other. And it's a great technique to learn if you're beginning. Again, sort of like the last technique that I showed you, it can be a little bit It can put a little bit of pressure on your joints because you're going to be pushing your wrists really forward like this. So if you have pain or anything in your wrists or your joints, either use the first technique, which is again easy and fine, and it's not going to put any pressure on your wrists or your hands, or you can take a little more time and learn the next one that I'm going to show you. So this one's kind of mid-range for those of you who might have a little bit of issues with that. All right, guys, so I've got my 1 pound of clay here, cut off of the block and measured, weighed. So to start ram's horn, you're going to kind of want to bring it in on itself almost a little bit. And then I'm going to bring it in and push forward. Doesn't look great yet, okay? So after your first pass, it's not gonna really look like ram's horn yet, but it's gonna get there. And don't be afraid to make adjustments. You know, I feel like people just wanna get straight into where they're kneading kind of seamlessly, but you sort of have to prep the clay a little bit to get it to go in that direction. So I'm going in and forward, and in and forward, and it's gonna start to get into that shape that I'm looking for. And when you get a saturated point on your board, you can always just move over a bit so you don't get any sticking. So I am starting to get my ram's horn shape now. So you can see I'm getting a bit of my spiral on the side. Now guys, it's not as pretty as in my illustration. Your spirals with your clay in real life will never be as perfect as the way you can draw them, but you can vaguely start to see on the sides a little bit of spiraling action. And then down here, these layers, these are good. You want to see those. That means you're getting access to each layer of the clay, compressing it, spiraling it, and getting rid of any air bubbles or inconsistencies. So I'm going to do this about 50 times or for about 60 seconds. You can count it, you can time it, you can do that however you want, but just make sure that you don't over wedge, because all that moisture you're seeing come out on the board, that's getting out of your clay. So if you do it too much, you lose a little bit more moisture than what's desirable. So just keep going here a little bit longer, and my spiral and my ram's horn just get more and more pretty as I do this more. And when I say pretty, I just mean more organized. The clay seems smoother and my spiral is getting a little bit tighter. So you can really start to see it now, and it's gonna spiral all throughout the clay. So I'm gonna stop there and show you guys how to finish this up. So I'm going to do one final roll, really compressing those layers back up and into kind of the area where the ram's horn is. So now I've got this, so I can still see my spirals on the side, and I'm just gonna pat it into a ball. Now, talking about parts of this process that can be a little bit hard on your joints, wrists in particular, this isn't the funnest or the lowest impact. So if you have trouble with this, feel free to just roll it a little bit if you need a little bit easier compression, because this is kind of a step where we do want to kind of compress and get those clay particles all nice and tight and snug. You can also take care of cracks just by kind of finessing those a little bit. If you don't want to keep patting it and patting it to get it completely smooth. And this is about the point where I would stop. Now I know that my spiral was here and here, so I know it's still there, but I think it was going in this direction, which is not the direction that I will be on the wheel. I go counterclockwise because I'm a righty. So I'm gonna turn this over. Now I know my spiral is going this direction, and I just put a little mark with my fingernail so I know which side's gonna go up when I get on the wheel. So I'm ready to set this aside and wedge up some more clay. And that wraps it up for the ram's horn technique. Oh, and you guys, it doesn't have to be a perfect ball to go on the wheel. What you're more concerned about really is just smoothing out the surface and not having any separation in the surface. Okay, so you can see this is not perfectly circular, but that's okay. It doesn't bother me. It's still gonna work just fine. Okay, third and final technique. The most challenging one, but one that's worth learning, again, if you're gonna be making a lot of pots in volume. So it's the cone or the spiral. So again, I'm starting off with my 1 pound cut off of the block. Actually, I think this is a little less than a pound, but it's fine for what we're doing today. So just like with ram's horn, it's gonna start looking kind of awkward because you sort of got to get it going in the direction that you want before it's gonna look like a cone or a spiral at all. So, you know, if you do a couple passes and you get this, you're fine. You're just gonna sort of finesse it until it starts getting into that cone shape. So it'll take a few passes before you start to see it, but this is what you should start to see. So I'll tell you what I'm doing with my hands here, because again, on this technique, my hands are doing 2 different jobs. So my right hand, my dominant hand, if you're a lefty, your left is going to be doing what I'm showing you right now. It's kind of like turning a doorknob and pushing forward. So it's kind of like this and then this. My left hand is just going to sort of be facilitating and also pushing forward when the right hand pushes forward. So I'll kind of talk through that as I do it once. So my right hand is twisting and pushing forward, and now my left is coming in and pushing forward as well. So at the end, they do kind of work in tandem, but during the spiraling part, or the kind of that twisting motion, your left hand's just kind of hanging out. So as I get going, it'll look like this. And same with ram's horn. You want to do this 50 to 60 times. You don't want to overdo it, as you will lose too much moisture from your clay. And you can start to see my spiral again here, and my layers happening down here. So those layers are showing that my spiral is going from here, and it's spiraling all the way out and getting into every layer of the clay. And again, same as ram's horn again, your spiral's not going to be beautiful and symmetrical, but that's okay. You can kind of vaguely see it, and that's all the confirmation that you need. So one problem that I've seen students encounter with this technique sometimes is if you push too far forward, you'll end up actually kind of like scraping some of the clay so thin that you get like these really papery thin spots and it'll tear off. So if you're noticing that, just go a little more shallow and a little more gentle when you're pushing through. Sorry, I'm moving around the board, you guys. I need a dry spot. So instead of extending out really, really far, just kind of bring it back in a little bit. So again, twist and then push with both hands. Well, this is almost finished. And you can see my cone shape is pretty well formed now. So to wrap this up, I'm just gonna push really shallow to thicken up my layers down here so that I don't have a long extending row of layers. You kind of want to get them all into one. And then you're just gonna roll it over and compress, okay? And now I'm gonna pat it into a ball. And all of the same finishing techniques that you saw on ram's horn are the same with cone from here on out, okay? And that's it. That's gonna wrap it up for our wedging video. I hope that these 3 techniques helped you and that you know that you can do any of them, you can do all of them, you can do whichever one you feel comfortable with day to day. You don't have to stick with just one. I usually teach my students the ram's horn first, and then I try to get them to graduate to the cone, just because like we mentioned before, if you're going to be working with clay a lot, you kind of want the most low impact technique that you can get. But outside of that, any of these 3 techniques are fine, and if you want to do that first easiest one, don't let anybody judge you for that. Whatever accommodations you need, you take them, okay? As long as you keep doing pottery, because that's what's important. All right, we will see you back in our studio next time, and thank you for joining us. Bye, Pottery People.